Well, hello and welcome to class. This session is called Recharging Your Stressed Out Brain in a Prescription-Free Way. My name is Meredith Patterson. I'm a registered nurse and I live right here in New Braunfels, Texas. My clinical field is neurology and I love talking about the brain. So I want you to think of me as your tour guide as we kind of explore through the lobes together. Those of you who have seen me present before know that may know that I have a company called Brainstorm Mind Fitness, and I teach a good deal about this notion of brain health, the underlying pillars being exercise, nutrition, neurobics or mental activity, socialization, and the topic for today, managing your stress. And why this topic? Well, when the organizer of this conference and I talked about which topic they would prefer, this one sadly just jumped out because we're living in 2020. So if you're not feeling stressed enough these days, that means you're just not watching enough news. There are plenty of things to be concerned about in the world. And you as caregivers or people who take care of people who have dementia especially know everything that there is to write about stress, because your stress is every day. So I'm going to take a little deeper dive into this topic and try to help you out. Let's back up and talk a little bit about what stress actually is and what the definition that we knew it as a disruption of homeostasis by an external factor. So unpacking that means homeostasis, that's our balance, the way that we know things. And an external factor is something that's like a predator that's attacking you. And you jump into action to respond to that. Well, the definition now is a negative concept that can impact on physical and or mental well-being. A very much more ambiguous kind of definition, don't you think? That could mean that maybe someone makes a comment that you don't like, or someone gives you a funny look and you worry about that all day. So our notion of stress has changed. Nature intended stress to be something to basically save your life. It's a survival instinct. And when you have an acute stressor and you're being chased by a predator in New Braunfels, Texas, a lot of physical changes take place and the stress hormone adrenaline kicks in. So this is when our vital signs speed up and suddenly we have superhuman strength. And it's that fight or flight response that we all learned about in biology class. And then after the event, you live to fight another day and everything calms down. You go back to a normal state of being. But not so with chronic stress. And by chronic stress, I mean stress that is day in, day out, that may last for weeks, for months, maybe for years. And that is what most of us who have stress suffer from now. So it may be the stress of a job, it may be the stress of a personal relationship, and certainly it can be the stress of caring for a loved one who is chronically ill. What happens when you have chronic stress, which is unrelenting, is the brain produces and expresses another stress hormone called cortisol. And I think of cortisol as kind of the evil twin sister to adrenaline. Cortisol can be very, very damaging to the brain, and especially in the part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is that very key, critical part of your brain that's essential for new learning and for making new memories. I kind of call it the driver of the brain. There have been studies even with twins who, one of which would have PTSD, and they can see that the volume of the hippocampus is diminished with that person with chronic stress. So that's not a good thing. And the effects on cognition, well, certainly memory problems, problems with concentrating, people saying that they've kind of got a brain fog, poor judgment, maybe they feel kind of negative and worried. They're just not having a good day. And then to top everything off, their sleep quality suffers, or they just can't sleep. And sleep, let me tell you, is no small thing. Sleep is very primal. It's as important as food or water. You need sleep to live, and you need sleep for your brain to be in full gear. More and more research shows us how vital sleep is for memory and learning, and for just maintaining your overall brain health. And you know, I think that sleep gets short shrift in this fast-paced world where we worship at the altar of the Starbucks. But prolonged deprivation has very serious consequences. And sadly, according to the World Health Organization, we have an epidemic of poor sleep and sleep loss. In fact, the WHO says that 2/3 of adults in developed nations do not get the recommended 8 hours of sleep a night. Other things that can happen with sleep deprivation, physiologically, it can elevate blood glucose. It wreaks havoc on the immune system. People who don't get enough sleep can gain weight easily because the hormone that suppresses appetite and makes you feel full, that's kind of diminished with poor sleep. It can actually cause changes in brain activity when measured by an EEG. And certainly cognition, again with the hippocampus, blocking your ability to learn things. If you're not sleeping well, it's hard for you to learn new things and to absorb new information. We even associate it also with an inclination towards, or increased risk, I should say, for Alzheimer's disease, especially with non-rapid eye movement stages of sleep. I'm going to get into the stages now and break that down for you. You know, we have different brain waves throughout the day and through the night when we are fully awake and when we're sleeping. And brain waves are kind of like synchronized pulses of neuronal activity, of that brain cell activity as the brain cells communicate with one another. So when we're fully up and awake and charged and had our first cup of coffee, you're in a state called beta. And that means that the frequency of your brain waves is faster. If you're still kind of alert, but you're pretty calm and relaxed, that's alpha. That's a pleasant place to be. And then for sleep and heavy sleep, there are two slower brainwave patterns called theta and delta. When we sleep, our brain takes us through different cycles of different stages of sleep. And so we might go through for a full night maybe 5 or 6 cycles of sleep. As we measure brain activity during sleep, sometimes we see, almost like an EKG, an increased burst of neuronal activity. This is called a sleep spindle. And I'll talk more about that. That takes place in a very critical part of one of the stages. So let's break down those stages and talk about what they mean and how much time you spend in them. So most people know that there are 2 basic stages: rapid eye movement, or REM stage, and non-REM, which has 3 different stages. So stage 1, non-REM, is when you are changing over, you have that sort of drowsy period where you go from wakefulness to sleep. You're just starting to drop off, and hopefully that's just 5 or 10 minutes. Now, stage 2 is interesting. That's when you become more relaxed. That's when your brain starts to produce those sleep spindles of activity. And that stage 2 lasts about 20 minutes. Stage 3 is your good, deep sleep. You need that good, restful sleep. And this is where your muscles relax and blood pressure drops, and it helps. It's a restorative type of sleep. And then REM sleep, well, that's when the bizarro dreams take place, because that's a real different kind of sleep stage. The brain becomes more active, but the body completely shuts down, almost in a state of paralysis. So for REM sleep, you're getting about 90 minutes to 2 hours per night, and the rest of it is non-rapid eye movement. During REM stages, the brain waves are similar to waking and your body doesn't move. Stage 2, non-REM, is when the brain is asleep but also awake. It's doing its business of pruning and sorting out those memories and information which to keep and which to throw away, sort of a sorting process. And then, of course, stage 3, that nice restorative, make you feel refreshed when you get up in the morning state. So think about non-REM stages as when you are reflecting and consolidating and taking the information that you've had through the day and sorting through it. It's almost like a file transfer process where you're moving memory packets from a temporary storage in your hippocampus to another part of the brain, or you're discarding it if it's not relevant to you. And then REM sleep is where your emotions come into play. And this is usually when you're sorting out, making connections about things that you're thinking about, and maybe even you're getting some insights. So people who say that they don't dream, it may be that you actually are, but at the time that you wake up, you're in another stage, because certainly you're going to remember your dreams if you wake up while you're in REM sleep. And speaking of dreams, and while we are in the pandemic that we're all in the midst of, have you been dreaming more during COVID? There have been a number of stories and articles and some research about the fact that we all seem to be dreaming, and more dreams, more colorful dreams, and what's going on with that. So let me give you a few theories that are floating around about dreaming during a pandemic. One is that maybe if you're not working anymore and you've got plenty of time, you might just be sleeping more and you have more REM stages and therefore more dreams. That's kind of a simplistic theory. Another theory that I think holds true for most of it is that the REM sleep and our dreams are reflecting our emotions and our core concerns. So if we have this kind of anxiousness and uncertainty, as certainly we do, it's being expressed more in dreams. And then finally, if you are at a level of anxiety because of the pandemic, perhaps you're waking up more through the night and you're remembering dreams as you have more frequent awakenings. So it's kind of an interesting little sidebar, but it's certainly something that's taking place during this pandemic. Now, as we age and go through life cycles, our sleep changes. And as people get older, it takes a little longer to fall asleep. And although we still need the same number of hours of sleep, we kind of get a shorter period of time. So if we were getting about 7.5 hours when we were 20, on the average it's down to a little over 6 hours at 62, or 60 or 62, that early 60s range. A lot of people will tell you, I just have to get up, and during the night, maybe I have to go to the bathrooms, but nighttime awakeness is certainly something that's common with aging. Governing our sleep cycles is a built-in, very primitive system called the circadian rhythm. And it has to do with the rise and fall of a substance called melatonin, which I'm sure you've heard of, throughout the day. Melatonin, I hesitate to call it a hormone, I'll call it a neurohormone, but it is a natural substance that reacts to the amount of light to our retinas. So as we're up during the day and we take in the bright sunlight or bright lights, melatonin is suppressed. When we start to dim the lights and go to sleep at nightfall, then melatonin shifts into gear. So it's kind of a balance if you're in homeostasis. And if you think about when you were a kid where you used to get up and play when it was daylight and at nighttime you went to sleep, that's the way nature intended. Now teenagers have a slightly different shift or circadian rhythm pattern. Their day shifts later. That's why teenagers can stay up so late at night and they want to sleep till noon the next day. It's a normal for them. And by the way, how many hours do we need? Well, researchers still agree between 7 to 9 hours. In that teenage group, they need the most sleep out of any age group, about 9 or 10 hours for teenagers. So if you visit any high school in the area and the students are there for an 8 o'clock class and maybe they had sports or band practice at 7 a.m., you're going to find some sleepy kids in that classroom. Well, why don't we just take sleeping pills and just take care of our troubles and anxieties and just knock out at night and go to a full 8 hours? If you've tried sleeping pills, or even if you haven't, you may have heard there's some problems associated with them. One is that they certainly may work for the short term, but long term you may have considerable dependence. By and large, prescription sleeping pills are hypnotics, which attach themselves to nerve cell receptors. And if you stop them, if you feel like you don't need them, that may actually cause a rebound in insomnia. So after a while, they're not as effective. They don't do what they used to do for you. And moreover, even when you take them and they work, the architecture of your sleep is worse. And the sleep cycles get a little off kilter. You don't feel truly as rested as you would without. Other side effects, oh boy, I could write a book about all the stories I've heard of people on Ambien, where they can have all kinds of things from waking up and sleepwalking to wandering into the kitchen and eating a loaf of bread without realizing it. Many kind of strange side effects. Now, compounding this problem is the fact that we are all exposing ourselves to quite a bit of what we call blue light in the form of electronics. That's the light that's emitted from our laptops, our television screens, our phones. And this type of light relays signals to the thermostat of the brain, which is the hypothalamus. It's telling the hypothalamus, hey, wake up. Compounding this problem, we might not have had this as prevalent, say, a couple of decades ago. But according to a Nielsen survey a couple of years ago, Americans now spend 10 hours and 39 minutes a day in front of some kind of screen. That includes TVs and cell phones and laptops. That's a lot of time. Actually, it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for anything else, but that's what the picture is now. So when you have this blue light beaming in your face, it's suppressing that melatonin, and you may have a really hard time getting to sleep. So some tips for you. Turn off that TV, turn off the computer. Good heavens, don't watch the news right before you go to sleep. That'll keep anybody up. If you do want to enjoy your electronics, there are some workarounds. One is to get some blue light blocking glasses, which are amber color. My husband calls these my Bono glasses. I use them myself if I want to watch a movie before bed. And they work actually pretty well, although you look a little strange. There's also screen blocker or screen light controllers that most phones and laptops provide. So if you must be on some form of electronics, you can try that. The most important things for getting to sleep are compiled in a wonderful book that I highly recommend. It's called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's one of the best books on sleep that I've seen. It's fairly recently published. And Dr. Walker gives us some solid advice, I think. Nothing too complicated. One of the rules is that you go to bed and you get up at the same time or about the same time every day, so you're not sleeping in and staying up real late on weekends. Optimally, you want to sleep in a very cool environment. And it sounds pretty cold, but around 65 degrees is considered optimal. And then if you do have problems with sleep, Dr. Walker suggests that you skip the drugs entirely and try something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. And this is when you, most of the time, you work with a therapist on breaking bad sleep habits and doing things like restricting your time in bed and kind of building up a sleep pressure so that you really feel tired when you go to sleep. As you do this, you become more confident with sleeping and you're not so dependent on other things. It does have the endorsement of a number of medical associations, including the American College of Physicians, who suggest it should be a first-line treatment. and the benefits last long term, not short term like drugs. By the way, I've looked into it, and you can certainly get a therapist online. There's even programs that are reasonable that you can look at online for this type of therapy. So it is doable. Another thing you might consider is meditation, which is a powerful way of calming the brain and chilling out that brainwave activity. With meditation, if you look at PET scans or functional MRIs, you can see that after meditation, brain activity becomes quieter and the beta waves go to alpha. It sort of turns off or turns on a dimmer switch so that your brain quiets. A lot of people think that meditation is impossible to do, but take baby steps. Maybe try 5 minutes of just focusing on your breathing. Something is better than nothing. And finally, I want to talk about this huge myth we call multitasking. The notion that we're not productive unless we're doing several things at once. Throw that word out of your vocabulary, because your brain, at least the frontal lobe of your brain, which governs all of the high-level thinking and your planning and tasks that you need to do, is only equipped to do one thing at a time. So if you think that you're watching Game of Thrones and you're answering a text and you're following a recipe while you're cooking dinner, simultaneously, you're fooling yourself. Really, your brain is just going to one place, rebooting, starting up, rebooting, going over here, rebooting. And it is a very inefficient processing system. There have been studies of people, particularly young people, who think that they're just brilliant at multitasking, that it's no problem at all. But when given tests where they are measured in being able to sort out what's relevant and irrelevant, they fail pretty badly. And age makes no difference. So even if you're a 20-year-old, if you're multitasking, you may be no smarter or faster than somebody several decades older. It's going to impact your short-term working memory. It's going to cause you to become more distracted. And there are even some studies where it has an effect on IQ. So all of these things don't sound too good to me. I promise you, if you focus on one thing at a time, your life will be so much richer for it, and you'll get a lot more done. When you switch tasks, it takes a while for you to reorganize your brain and get on the next task. So you spend a lot of time, according to a survey at Harvard, almost 50% of your time on something other what you were currently focusing on. So you're taking away minutes of your day. That's called attention residue. So here's some tips for you. When you are working on something that doesn't require your phone, put your phone in another room. Turn it off, make it so that you can't hear it, you can't see it. Just having that phone in the room is a distraction. Schedule times that you're going to check your email. It's okay if you don't immediately answer somebody. Schedule certain times of the day and then check it. I know it's tempting to look at your phone all day long, but try this and you'll get a lot more done. And then a final tip that I think works very well is schedule what you want to do in shorter term increments. 15, 25 minutes, I'm going to work on my PowerPoint. 15, 25 minutes, I'm going to read this book, whatever. And just do that. At the end of that period, you'll find that you've become absorbed. You're more in the flow of things, and you're actually getting some work done. So try these things that run contrary to our way of thinking now and build up your brain benefits. I hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation, and I am available by email, through electronics, of course, and I have a phone and a website. I also have a book called Pillars of Brain Fitness if you're curious about getting your brain health up and running. So thank you so much for attending, and I'll see you next time.